All right, IM3 classes. We are continuing with our solving the polynomials. This time we're talking about a method called completing the square. So first thing we need to do is review how to solve quadratics with the square in there of an equation like this. We don't need any special method to do this. This is just normal solving. First thing I need to do is take care of that square. Opposite of squaring something is the square root. So I'm going to square root both sides. Square root and the square on this side cancel out. So all I have is x plus 5. Over here, square root of 15. It's not a perfect square. And for today's lesson, none of them are going to be a perfect square. We're just going to leave them like this. Square root of 15. One thing you need to remember, it can be plus or minus. So do plus or minus square root of 15. All right. Next thing I just need to subtract the 5 from both sides. Plus 5 minus 5. So all I have is x here. Over here, all right, don't subtract 5. We can't subtract it from inside the square root. This 15 is being like protected by that square root. We can't do anything to it. So what we just do is we're just going to say it's minus 5 plus or minus the square root of 15. All right, so this is just like our last lesson where we factor and solve the equations with the x with the squared on there have two solutions. This does have two solutions. We could separate this out into x is equal to -5 plus the square root of 15, or x is equal to -5 minus the square root of 15. So you can separate out this plus or minus, and that's where it becomes the two equations. I'm just going to write it like this just because it's easier, it takes up less space, but you just need to understand that it is in fact two solutions we are getting. -5 plus 15 or -5 minus 15. All right, let's do another example here. So one more. Opposite of squaring something is the square root. 7 is not a perfect square, so we just leave it as the square root of 7. Just remember, when you square root something, it can be plus or minus. Here, the square and the square root cancel each other out, so we just have x minus 9. Last step, I need to add 9 to both sides. Minus 9 plus 9 cancels each other out, and I get x is equal to 9 plus or minus the square root of 7. I'll write out both solutions one last time here. So the two solutions would be 9 plus the square root of 7, or x is equal to 9 minus the square root of 7. All right, again, all we are doing is taking the plus or minus and separating it out into two solutions. All right, so let's move on to what completing the square actually is. Actually, before we get there, the general form of a quadratic equation, you may remember this from IM2, or you may not, that's okay. Going over it right now. A quadratic equation has the x squared plus x plus a number on the side. We use a, b, and c to determine the different, or to help when we're talking about a general form. We use a, b, and c as the coefficients and the constant. So the a is always in front of the x squared, the b is always in front of the x, and the c is the constant by itself. All right, we need to know, because we're going to be talking about the a, b, and c. All right, so what we're doing, we are going to complete the square. So if you remember back to our lesson, factoring special polynomials, there was those perfect square polynomials that factored into two identical factors that we could write as the factor square. That is what we are doing. We are going to make this a perfect square trinomial, so it factors nice and easy into two identical factors, and that's going to make it easy to solve. First thing, so we have n squared minus 36n. We are going to find the c value that makes this a perfect square trinomial. So the c value, what we do, c is equal to b divided by 2 squared. So c is equal to the b value, in this case is -36, so we take that middle term, divide it by 2, and then square it. Double equal sign, that's weird. Negative 36 divided by 2 is 18. Negative 18, I should say, squared. And then negative 18 squared is 324. So the C value, so C is 324. So I would add that to the end here. So this is a perfect square trinomial, right? So what we're going to do now is factor this perfect square trinomial. So the way we factored it before is you need to do the, you would do the X factor, 324 on top, negative 18 on bottom, not negative 36 on bottom. Figure out the factors that multiply 324 and add to 36. That would be negative 18. But here we're going to simplify all this. So instead of doing all this, you don't need to do the X factor because we created a perfect square trinomial. What this is going to factor to. All right. So you're going to put your variable here. This is always going to be whatever the B value, the middle number divided by 2 is. So it's always going to factor into n minus 18 squared. And so that is it. So the C was 324. The factored form is n minus 18 squared. Let's do another example. All right, let's find the C value. Do it over here. So C is equal to, it's the middle number, so 34 over 2 squared. 34 over 2 is 17 squared. 17 squared is 289. So here, 289 makes it the perfect square trinomial. And then when I factor it, it's going to be m plus this number here. So it's going to be n plus 17 squared. If you want to double check it with the X factor, you can, but that's how it's going to work out every time. This is what completing the square does. You make the perfect square trinomial so it works out for this nice and easy factor. Right? Let's do one more example. So again, I'm going to find the C value. So C is equal to negative 6 over 2 squared. Negative 6 over 2, negative 3 squared is 9. So the C values is 9. So our perfect square trinomial, this is going to factor into x minus 3 squared. Done. All right. So now let's look how we can use this to solve an equation. So we're going to solve by completing the square. So before, what we would do, what we learned last time is you would add 8 to both sides, and you get p squared plus 10p minus 58. What we would find if we try to do this and then try to factor it is it's not going to factor. And so this is when we use completing the square, is when we have a trinomial like this where it doesn't factor, but we still need to solve it. All right. So if it does factor, you'd want to factor and solve it because that's easier and faster. But for here, it's not going to factor. So we're gonna use completing the square. First thing, it's a little bit different than the factoring one, is we just want the p's on one side and the other numbers on the other. So instead of adding 8 to both sides to get everything on one side, I'm going to add 66. So I get p plus 10 is p is equal to negative 8 plus 66 is positive 58. And then from here, I need to find the C value just on this portion here. So I'm gonna do the C in blue. So C is equal to, it's going to be this value here. So I'm ignoring the 58 right now. I'm just dealing with this, and that's supposed to be a P squared. So I'm going to use B is 10. So it's going to be 10 divided by 2 squared. 10 divided by 2 is 5. Squared is 25. So I'm going to add 25. Here's the thing, whatever you do to one side of the equation, you have to do the other. So since I'm adding 25 here, I have to add it over here as well. All right, whatever you do to one side, you have to do the other. This side here, I factor just like we practiced. So it's going to be P, this value here, plus 5 squared. And 58 plus 25 is 83. All right, now we have an equation that we can solve just like we did those first few we did in the lesson. So first thing I'm going to do is subtract. Actually, I can put a little line of separation here. Take the square root of both sides. Square root of squared, that cancels out. So I just have P plus 5 is equal to the square root of 83. That is not a perfect square, so we just do plus or minus the square root of 83. If this came out to be a perfect square, that would have mean that you could have factored it. All right, that means your answer is going to come out to a whole number. You could have factored it. All right, you continue on. Don't go back and factor it because you're almost done. But from here, the reason why we are completing the square is because this should not end up as a perfect square. All right, if it ends up as a perfect square, there's other methods to solve that are easier. Last step, I'm going to subtract 5. So plus 5 minus 5 cancels out. And so my two possible solutions is going to be -5 plus or minus square root of 83. I'm going to leave it like that. All right, let's do another example. Make it a little bit bigger. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 53 to both sides. I'm just going to complete the square on the one side. So it's going to be x squared minus 12x is equal to 10 plus 53 is 63. I'm going to complete the square on the left side. So I'm going to find my C value. It's going to be -12 divided by 2 squared. So -12 divided by 2 is -6 squared is positive 36. So I'm going to add 36 here. That's going to give me my perfect square trinomial. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do the other. So I have to add 36 over here as well. Right? Factor this left side. So that's going to do that easy perfect square trinomial factoring. So it's going to be x minus 6 over there squared is equal to 63 plus 36 is 99. Square root both sides, you get x minus 6 is equal to square root of 99. We're just going to leave it as plus or minus the square root of 99. Last step, add 6 to both sides. You get x is equal to 6 plus or minus square root of 99. And we're done. All right, and that will do it for that lesson. If you have any questions, just let me know. Other than that, we will see you guys next time.